I did a crazy thing. I answered my phone even though I didn't recognize the number it was calling. And it actually paid off though. It was a guy named Todd Marks, and he said he's working on the new Steve Jobs movie. This was a few years back. And I wanted to say, oh, which one? Because there have been several. But I didn't, because I'm not rude. I said, oh, cool. And he said, yeah, we're working on this movie, and Danny Boyle is directing it. And I thought, oh, I've heard of him. He has an Oscar, so that's pretty good. And then he said, yeah, Aaron Sorkin wrote it, and I watch TV. So I've heard of Aaron Sorkin. He wrote The West Wing. He has some Emmys, and it turns out, according to Wikipedia, he has an Oscar too. Pretty cool. So he's got my attention. Actually, when he said Steve Jobs movie, that was kind of interesting to me because I'm sort of a lifer working in Silicon Valley, and my house looks like an Apple store before there were Apple stores and things like that. So I had heard of this movie, actually, and I was intrigued why somebody was calling me because I worked at Apple for a while back in the 80s, but I didn't really know Steve Jobs that well, sort of a little bit. So why is he calling me about the Steve Jobs movie? And he says, we're trying to recreate a lot of the stuff from Steve Jobs' life, and we heard you were around then. I thought, you heard I was around then? Okay. And again, I thought I didn't really know him that well. Why do you want me? So he said, well, we're recreating, we have a scene where we redo where the Macintosh was introduced in 1984. And we heard that you were there and that you videotaped it and had a lot to do with it. And I thought, okay, the first part is true. I was there. I didn't videotape it. I taped it off of TV later. And I put it on YouTube, and now a lot of people thought that I was running the camera, which I was not doing. And I didn't have a lot to do with it either, but I said, okay, some of that's true. And he said, well, Apple doesn't want to help us. This part I knew was true, because Apple likes to control the story, and they probably didn't want to have anything to do with this movie. And they were probably asking people that did know not to talk to them. So I said, yeah, I kind of get that. So he says, do you want to come to the movie office? We're actually here in San Francisco getting ready to shoot the movie in the Bay Area. And I thought, oh, that's kind of weird because they never shoot things where they really took place. They shoot it in Georgia or Vancouver or someplace that will pay them extra money and that's a lot cheaper than the Bay Area. But no, Danny Boyle wanted to shoot it in the Bay Area. So I thought that was pretty cool too. And he said, come talk to us if you would. And I said, sure I will, why not? And I'm thinking, will you pay me a lot of money? But I didn't say that because that's not me. So I just said, sure, I'll come. So a couple weeks later, I go to the movie office. And I think I'm in the wrong place because I'm out near Pier 80. And it's not an awesome neighborhood. And there's this old building that's got the address of where I'm supposed to go that looks like the next breeze will knock it down. And, but there's a lot of cars out front, and it's the address. And I go in the door, and inside, it's different. Inside, it's like I'm in some Avengers base or something. You know, like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. are inside because outside is all crappy. The inside is people running around and equipment set up. Everybody is kind of wearing black and caps, and they look like they're secret agents or at least artists. And they're, I guess, movie people making movies. And there's signs on the doors that say things like wardrobe and special effects and script and all this stuff is going on. And I've never seen such a beehive of activity. And I see Todd, and he's taking me around and showing me the different departments. And he introduces me. And when he introduces me, I feel like I'm being introduced as like the historian of Apple. Because nobody from Apple would talk to them. And I'm the first person that they've seen who actually was around in the days when they were making the stuff that they're going to turn into their movie. And as I walk around, I notice that there are big blown up pictures on the wall of all the sets, all the scenes that they want to film. Like the place where the Mac was introduced, which was Flint Center in Cupertino, and Apple's headquarters, and Steve Jobs' house where he grew up are all in big pictures on the wall. And then I go into another room, and there's an entire wall with nothing but pictures of Macintosh error messages. And I go into another room, and as I'm walking, by the way, people are coming up to me with like t-shirts and saying, Scott, was this out in 1984? Would they be wearing this? I don't know. Yes, okay. And then, they'll have this other one. They said, somebody wore this on SNL in 1986. Do you think we could have that in an 87 scene? Yes, that's okay. And I'm feeling like, wow, I have a new superpower. And so I'm walking around and looking at all this stuff up on the wall, and it's very surreal to me, because 5 minutes ago I was standing outside on Pier 80 looking at a crappy building, wondering if I was in the wrong place, and now I'm running a movie, apparently. So, and then it gets even weirder, because I walk into this room where there's lots of Apple ads and different things that they must have gotten off the internet and put up on the walls. And I look, and there is a picture of me and my wife from 1984, from an Apple ad on the wall. And I walked up to it, and I kind of went like that, and I said, that's me and my wife. And the people who are following me around are like, yeah, it looks like you. I mean, I had more hair, but that just made it even more surreal. So then he says, the director wants to talk to you. I thought, oh, that's great. The director's going to say hi. I'll meet this guy, Danny Boyle, who's made some great movies and won an Oscar. And he'll say hi, and then he'll run along because he's super busy. He comes by and talks to me for an hour about the movie. Now, I don't think he was giving me special treatment. I think this was his pitch. He had this pitch, and I think it was so usual for him to talk to people about this movie that I was the next person in line, and he pitched me. And he said, it's about Steve Jobs, but it's about his mind. It's not a big explosion special effects movie. And I thought, well, Steve Jobs' movie probably wouldn't have a lot of explosions and special effects. And he said something I still remember. He said, it's not a portrait, it's a sketch. It's not exactly what happened in his life and what happened in his career. It's kind of about him. And we take some liberties. Not everything in it is literally true. So I'm okay with that. But he was just so gracious to spend this time talking to me, and he praised me. He said, we love that so many people who were around back then are still working in the industry and helping the company, and spent a lovely hour that I thought was going to be an instant. When I was finally done talking to him, he invited me to come to the shoot where they were going to recreate the Macintosh introduction, which you may recall I was at but didn't film. And I said, sure, I'd love to go to that. That sounds great. And then he left, and I left, and I realized I was there for 4.5 hours. I thought I was going to be there for about 20 minutes. So that day was blown, but it was cool. It was a lot of fun. I was glad to be there. Okay, so a few weeks later, I go to the movie shoot where they're going to recreate the original Mac intro. The auditorium holds 2,500 people, and they're very worried because they need 2,500 extras to show up and fill the room. And it's hard to do that, apparently. Even if you put out ads and say, come be in a movie, a lot of people don't show up. They had 4,000 people show up. They had to turn 1,500 people away, and this was, you had to be there by 7 in the morning, and you had to sit there all day, and they fed you half a sandwich and a piece of lettuce or something. But people wanted to go be there. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. That's like the original when the Mac was introduced. And they had to turn people away. That's why it was on TV. That's why I taped it off TV, because people couldn't get in, so they put it on channel 54. So I'm there, and I meet the director again, and we talk, and he says, why don't you go get a seat in the audience? We'll get a shot of you for the movie. And I said, okay. So they pried some poor person out of their seat for a while, and because it was packed, like I mentioned, and I sat in the seat, and they filmed, and the stars were around, and it was really weird watching actors playing people I knew making a movie. Very strange, especially since some of them looked exactly like the people they played. Some of them looked nothing like the people they played. So that was a kind of a new experience. And then when that was all over, I found out something interesting about movies. Did you know movies have code names so they can be secret, like tech projects? And I got a badge with the code name of this movie. The code name of this movie was RDF. RDF stands for Reality Distortion Field. That was the nickname that people used to give to Steve Jobs' ability to kind of convince you of whatever he was talking about. You'd walk out of his speeches and think, yes, what he said was right. And then a little while later, when the RDF wore off, because the field strength kind of goes down as you get farther away, you'd maybe think about it again. I thought it was really funny that very pixelated RDF is the logo for the Steve Jobs movie, and I stole the badge. Sorry, Todd. Finally, at the end of the movie, I went out to my car, and it was at a college, and it was on a Saturday, and I didn't buy a parking sticker because it was Saturday in a college. And I got to my car, and I had a parking ticket on the car. And I thought, what would Steve Jobs do? Because Steve Jobs was kind of famous for parking in the handicap spot and never paying the tickets. I don't know if the whole story is true, but that's the story. What would Steve do? I thought Steve probably wouldn't pay it. But that's not me, so I paid it. Not every good Silicon Valley story revolves around Steve Jobs. A lot of them do. And if Steve Jobs is in a story, it becomes a Steve Jobs story. Nobody says, I went to this event, and there were a lot of people there, and Steve Jobs was there, and then this other thing happened. It's not the way you tell it. But there are other things that happened without him. One of the things that happened was a company called General Magic. Has anybody ever heard of General Magic? A few have heard of it. Isn't that a great name? It's kind of funny and whimsical and a little bit of hubris. And I first heard of General Magic when I was working at Apple in the early 90s. And I heard there was this company that was started by the two guys who kind of made the essence of the Macintosh. Two guys named Andy Hertzfeld and Bill Atkinson made the personality of what it was, the software. And they were starting this new company, General Magic. Wouldn't it be great to go and work there and see what are they going to do next after the Mac? Because Apple was kind of not sure what they were going to do. So they were my heroes. They were my Silicon Valley heroes. Have you ever heard the saying, don't meet your heroes? Well, you can meet your heroes, but don't interview with them. And I had to go interview with my heroes. And the biggest problem I had was not that they turned out to be bad people, but it was just keeping myself together while I'm talking to my heroes. Like they'd ask me a question, they'd say, so, if you had this particular problem, how do you think you might solve it? And I'd say, oh my God, I think that I might, Andy, I'd look it up in, this way, and you did some work in a few years ago, and so I'm constantly moving between losing my mind and saying, calm down, you have to talk to these people as if they were human beings, even though they're not, even though they're gods and your heroes. And somehow I made it through the interview. I came to find out that this was a common occurrence for people who went to interview there, because they were a lot of people's heroes. They were the heroes of many, many engineers and technical types in Silicon Valley. And all of us had to learn how to keep it together, to interview with them, and then eventually to work there, because I got the job. I was employee number 14 there, and I had to learn how to deal with them every day. And it was not their fault that they were amazing and famous. I had to figure it out myself. And finally, I did. The other thing that happened was other people came to work there to work with their heroes. This was a common theme. People are like, oh, Bill and Andy work there. I want to go figure out what they're doing. Well, it turns out what they wanted to do was make something they called a personal communicator. Personal communicator was a device that you would put in your pocket that would make phone calls, send messages, maybe send pictures, do email, run apps. Sound familiar? It was 1990. The iPhone came out in 2007. So General Magic was this really great place that invented a lot of stuff, but could not invent all the technology necessary to make an iPhone in 1990. We did our best, and we attracted some incredible people. One day I came to work, and there's a guy I don't know, and he's writing code that's going into our system. And I said, who's that guy? And they said, oh, that's Zarko. And I said, oh, who's Zarko? And why is he writing code, that's going into our system? Oh, he's brilliant. He's probably the best communications engineer in the world. Yeah, but he doesn't work here. Oh, he probably will pretty soon. And so he's helping with the software. So here was this guy who was working at the company before he worked at the company. I thought that was a little weird, but it wasn't the weirdest thing that happened there. And he did come to work a day or two later, so it was all legit. Then one of the things he did was he worked a lot. He stayed at the office for very late hours. So of course he built a loft above his desk so that he could sleep there. Because he didn't want to sleep on the floor. That was, other people did that who wanted to stay late. He built a loft. Now, it sounds like, why do you want to just sleep at your job and work all these hours? The answer is, they had a chance to build something really cool, really great, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. And it was the first company I was ever at where we had a discussion of, he wants to work 20 hours a day, but he wants to work a normal job. Is it possible to have both kinds of people at the same company? I was there, I had a family, I didn't want to work 20 hours a day, I wanted to work normal hours. I wanted to go home on weekends. Is it possible to employ both kinds of people? So that's pretty good. I think companies still haven't figured out the answer to that question, but in Silicon Valley especially, but they're working on it. So that's how we got Zarko. Now, we also had, and this is a little strange, we had a documentary film crew at our little company of 14 people. Why? Well, we had a really great pedigree. We came out of Apple. We were signed up with all the big electronics companies in the world. Sony, Motorola, Philips, Panasonic, all the phone companies, AT&T, were invested in our little company and were going to make stuff with us. So we thought we had a pretty good chance of being a really amazing company. So we had a film crew around. That seemed normal to me. I was 29 years old and thought that it was a normal occurrence, I guess. So, but it didn't quite happen. It didn't quite happen. As we got close to finishing our stuff, we were working really hard. One year we were working on the 4th of July, for example. And if you've ever built software, you know that that's one of the few times when a computer is waiting for you. You start a process and it takes a while and you go off and do something else. So what we did was, we started the software build, we made the text really big on the screen, we went up to the roof of the building with binoculars so we could look at the monitors to make sure the build was still working and watch fireworks out over the bay. And that was pretty good until Zarko got close to the edge and almost fell off, but luckily he didn't. And we built the software, and then we had an important meeting. It happened to be 3 a.m. by this time, and people are stumbling around, they're really tired. I remember coming around a wall with an engineer coming like this, and we did one of these things like, you go right, no, you go left. And the engineer looks at me and he says, I'm too tired to calculate the optimal path. And we all were. So we went to this meeting at 3 a.m. and we kind of had a vote. Do we think the software is good enough to send to our partners? And we kind of didn't. But the company said, well, we kind of have to because we can fix it later. And then I guess we all went to sleep and we weren't very happy. But that's not what killed General Magic. There were a lot of things that hurt General Magic and made it not succeed. One is, as I mentioned, all this infrastructure wasn't there in 1990. Nobody knew how to make a really good touch screen like on an iPhone, or a network that works fast and cheap, or email. Did you want email in 1990? If you did, you were way ahead of your time. Most people didn't want to walk around with email. What do you need that for? And apps and shopping on this device, wasn't time yet. So General Magic kind of drifted off. People at the company left in ones and twos. But an interesting thing happened. The people who left went on to do amazing things after that. The guy who created Android worked at General Magic. The guy who created the iPod and helped start the iPhone and started Nest worked at General Magic. The woman who was the CTO, Chief Technical Officer of the United States, and the man who started eBay, and the man in charge of Siri, and the guy in charge of the Apple Watch, all worked at General Magic, all at this company that was slightly larger than 14 by then, but was a failure. But all these people went on to succeed until they started calling the company the most important dead company in the history of Silicon Valley. Yay! And then, a few years ago, we lost Zarko to severe depression. And we kind of all got back together for the first time in many years. And the woman who had been filming the documentary, named Sarah Karouche, thought it might be a good time to revive the documentary. She got all the old footage from the 90s and started putting it together and thought there's this great story about success and failure and loss and renewal. And she made the documentary. It came out earlier this year. You might have heard about it. It's actually playing at a film festival here in town a week from Saturday. It's called General Magic, because when you have a great title, keep it. And my favorite thing about the General Magic movie, which is fantastic, but the thing I love the most is in all the footage, I'm 29 years old. So, let's close with a little more about the Steve Jobs movie. The Steve Jobs movie had a Bay Area premiere at the Castro Theater. They invited all the people in the Bay who worked on it. I got to go, and I got this cool souvenir ticket stub, which says, "Do not record, no recording." I didn't record. And I saw everybody there that I knew, and I watched the movie, and it was a sketch, not a portrait. There were some people who looked exactly like their real-life counterparts and some who didn't look anything like them at all. But I didn't think it really told the story of Steve Jobs, which means one of two things. Either there are going to be many, many more movies or 0 more movies about trying to figure out Steve Jobs. And when they showed the intro event that I was at, that they recreated, I wasn't in it. I got cut. But that's okay. I was there at the first one. And I got this cool ticket stub as a souvenir that I still have. And I got the badge, the RDF badge, and I got a parking ticket. Not to mention my General Magic towel. Thank you.